Now, we've talked a lot about nozzles and making good applications and about how we can operate the system effectively and also some of the data that we can get from Operations Center. But now I'd like to invite to the stage Dan Hartmann, a See & Spray customer, and Dr. Bryan Young from Purdue University to join us on stage, and we'll bring Josh back as well. Hi, Dan. Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome. So, Dan, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. My name's Dan Hartmann. I'm a fourth-generation farmer from Delkalb, Illinois. We raise corn, beans, a little bit of wheat, and we also custom feed some hogs.
Awesome. Dr. Young?
So I'm Bryan Young, faculty member at Purdue University in weed science, conducting research in herbicide-resistant weeds, application technologies, and been kind of in the weeds now for about 30 years.
Awesome. Thank you guys for joining us today. Dr. Young, we're going to start with you. You've had See & Spray for a couple of years now. Tell us a little bit about your experience and how you think about weed management and how it interacts with See & Spray.
Certainly. So, we've been working with what's called the ATM, that's been referred to earlier, so the research model of the See & Spray Ultimate machine, and we've been looking at that in terms of the weed size, weed location in the crop row versus in the row middles, as well as, looking at different herbicide strategies, the soil residual herbicide, and when do you use that See & Spray to see the greatest benefit, and looking at crop response issues, as well as some herbicide interactions.
Awesome. Now, we'd like to talk a little bit about best management practices for weed management with See & Spray. Would you talk us through some of your thoughts that we see here on the screen?
Well, when it comes to herbicide-resistant weeds, there's a lot of challenges today. That's the number one driver of weed management today is some of the resistance that we have. And I see a lot of potential challenges such as the economics. Can I afford to use the right herbicide at the right time? Crop injury, like I want to use this herbicide, but I'm concerned about the crop response, what that might do to my yield. And then we have some herbicide mixtures which are ideal for managing some of these problematic weeds, but how we implement that to make sure we optimize both of the herbicides that we want to use, or maybe 3 or 4 herbicides in a single tank or separate tanks can be an issue. And then I like to think that at some point we'll get some novel chemistry to make our weed management more robust and resilient in the presence of herbicide resistance. And then also we do have currently some regulatory issues from the EPA and Endangered Species Act that we'd be cognizant of in terms of how we apply our herbicides today.
Share with us some examples from your research about some of these. Let's start out with economics.
Sure. So the first one I want to go to that you're seeing here is a picture of water hemp that survived corn application post-emergent. So it survived glyphosate, atrazine, and then Callisto type product. And so we have resistance. And so how do we battle that weed? And I've had a lot of customers or growers, retailers comment about what do we do with this? We don't have confidence in this herbicide combination controlling this weed species. And so one herbicide that comes up is dicamba. And there's different products that I'm showing here on the screen, generic Clarity. That one looks pretty good because of the price point of $5 per acre. But it doesn't have a safener. And in terms of the application window, it's fairly narrow compared to the other 2 products on the screen. So if we go to the other 2, Diflex and Status, they both have safeners.
Yep. Okay,
so that's going to be safer to my crop, can allow for a wider application window, which is more favorable for being flexible to manage some of these weeds. Well, Diflex is just straight dicamba, whereas Status has a synergist. So it makes dicamba work a little bit better on some of our target weed species. And so that one out of the group, it's the most expensive, but from a weed management standpoint, concerned about resistance, Status is probably the preferred option out of those. But then you look at the price tag.
It's expensive.
It is. And so that's where there's a lot of pushback from growers and even those in retail, like I can't sell this to my customers because it's going to be $24 to $48. That's more than what they want to pay total for their post-emergence program in corn. So I think one thing to think about is, well, how can we use those higher rates of the herbicide? Because, ideally, I'd like to use 8 to 10 ounces of Status. And that gets to be pretty significant, $40 to $48 per acre. So in some of our research that we conducted this year looking at soil residual herbicides in corn, we had one of the pre-emergence programs result in a 65% savings in that post-application. And so I think if you apply that to something like Status in this scenario, something that is a real issue today, this water hemp that we can't control in corn consistently, adding another effective herbicide such as Status, but then we get a savings of maybe up to about $30 per acre while using the full rate of the herbicide, which is ideal for the weed management component. And I want to emphasize that the soil residual herbicides, in today's weed management are the core for managing these resistant weeds. And it's not just any residual herbicide, it's a residual herbicide that is going to be broad spectrum. It's going to have your challenging weeds such as water hemp, palmer amaranth, but also has to control some of the other weed species such as your annual grasses, as well as your large-seeded broadleafs like giant ragweed, cockleburr, and velvet leaf. Those haven't gone away. So when you do that, it's going to reduce how much of your post-emergence herbicide gets exposed to or used for control of those weeds that come up. And if you do that, that's also where you see the greatest savings from a See and Spray standpoint, when you do as much as you can to reduce how many weeds are out there at that post-timing. So what is good for See and Spray, reducing how many weeds you have at that post-timing is also best for our herbicide-resistant weed management.
And again, in this example, right, we're using the better product or the best product for this scenario to get better weed management because we can do that with a good pre followed up by a See and Spray application.
Right, so in some cases we think about how See and Spray might be, reducing the amount of herbicide used. In this case, it might create an opportunity where now I can afford this herbicide because it's not being applied to all of it. Otherwise, I would not have applied it.
I might jump in here and add, we're seeing that today, right? With some of our farmers and custom applicators, when they think about their herbicide program, they have a general line item range that they try and stay within. And so when they're looking at, okay, I'm not going to have to spray as much on the non-residual side, I'm still going to get after my weeds, but can I use that savings to use an upper echelon or higher tier product on the residual side to really get after some of the weed resistance challenges that I have? We're seeing that today.
So that's economics. Maybe talk a little bit about crop injury and what we've seen there.
Certainly. So if we move to the next slide, it shows some soybeans that was part of our research from this past year. And, I'll just start by saying that using herbicides according to label, we don't feel that there's a great risk of reducing your crop yield if you fall within the label guidelines for these herbicides today in our agronomic crops. However, there are situations where you have multiple stress factors. It could be drought. It could be a compacted short growing season from late planting. It could be some disease or drainage issues that you're dealing with as well. So there can be some chance of some yield loss if significant injury does occur. So what we have here is a double crop soybean situation that we conducted this past year, so a shortened growing season, and we used herbicide Cobra, which most would recognize as being one that does cause some significant soybean crop response. And we did that intentionally because these are high oleic soybeans, and it does have the Roundup trait, but we have glyphosate-resistant water hemp at the site. So we use a very strong soil residual herbicide in this program to help reduce how much post-emergence herbicide we needed to use. And so on the left, you can see the broadcast application of Cobra, and you can see the typical crop response that we would get out of Cobra at 12.5 ounces per acre at 7 days after application. On the right-hand side, we have Cobra being applied at the same rate using See and Spray, but you'd be hard-pressed to find too many injured leaves looking at that photo. So it did the job as expected in terms of reducing crop response. If we move to the next slide, you can see that we had an 80% savings in the amount of spray solution, the Cobra that was applied in the See and Spray. So our soil residual herbicide did the job, and it did indeed reduce the amount of crop response. Looking at the left-hand column for the broadcast application of Cobra versus the right-hand side for See and Spray, we kind of rate this like a plant pathologist would for disease incidence and severity. Yep. So you take the injury that you normally get from Cobra and then you multiply that by the percent of the area that was actually sprayed or impacted. And that's how we get the reduced injury for those treated areas. And you can see how injury does get reduced, all the way up to 4 weeks after treatment. But then the important part there is soybean yield was impacted. And so we had a 4 bushel increase where we used See and Spray because of reduced injury from Cobra.
Yeah. Dan, you used See and Spray this year on your operation. Mm-hmm. Did you see anything in terms of crop injury or yield in your farm this year?
Injury, yield, no. I never noticed anything like that. We did a couple side-by-side trials, and the one thing I did notice is I would go through, I finished one night in a field, but I didn't finish the field.
Yep. I
came back the next day, and I picked up right where I took off, and you could tell the spots where it had turned on because those beans looked different. Mm-hmm. So there was, crop response from it. So good or bad, it was very noticeable.
What product were you spraying?
Liberty.
Liberty?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Young, in your experience, is that something we might see with a Liberty application post?
Well, you can see some crop response from Liberty, some chlorosis and some necrosis, depends on the rate of Liberty being used, the environmental conditions during that application, the rate of ammonium sulfate that's being used with it as well, and other adjuvant systems and other possibly residual herbicides that are used in there for, an overlapping residual application.
Yeah. Crop injury. Now let's talk a little bit about tank mixtures.
Yeah.
Dr. Young, share with us about that.
So one of the most widespread glyphosate-resistant weeds that we have in the U.S. is volunteer corn in our soybeans. And so here's a picture of what we have used to normally combat the volunteer corn issue, which is the application of clethodim, or some might know it as Select, for management of volunteer corn. There's no volunteer corn in the picture because we controlled it.
It died.
Yeah, it's been controlled. So that's a broadcast application of clethodim, what it should do. The next photo is when we look at the combination in a single tank of clethodim with glyphosate and dicamba that we would have used in an extend system. And so there's some chemical incompatibility there that's going on, and you can see that we use the same rate of clethodim, but obviously had just the opposite results. We barely, injured some of that volunteer corn that we had in the plots. And moving to the next photo, this is where we had the dual tank system of the See and Spray Ultimate. And we used clethodim for the broadcast application, and then for the targeted spray, we used the dicamba and glyphosate. And so together, having dual tanks, we're able to optimize the application of those herbicides, where we regained all of our volunteer corn control to where it was before without the tank mix.
Yeah. And this is, again, one of those opportunities with See and Spray Ultimate. Because we have the tanks, it could be antagonisms, it could be you want to spray fungicide, and that has a different tip, right, for a fungicide versus a herbicide application because your droplet size, and that's where the dual tank system really can provide us some benefits.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the different nozzles that you might prefer for a contact versus systemic product that you might put in the tank. Different nozzles, different adjuvants.
Yeah.
So I do like the Ultimate with the dual tank system because you can optimize each herbicide component to the best of their ability.
So Dr. Young, as you look at these 5 practices that we've talked about, these 5 considerations, I don't know, it sounds to me like some of the core of good weed management isn't really changing because of See and Spray. There's still principles that we have to hold to, like good, strong residual herbicides to control weeds.
Right, and so I agree 100% with that See and Spray doesn't move us away from herbicide resistance management. It really reinforces what we need to do for herbicide resistance management, in that the stronger that residual herbicide, the greater benefit you're going to see on the See and Spray side for the spray savings. And it also allows us to use the new herbicides or ones that are too expensive. So I see it really being a great addition to our toolbox for managing herbicide-resistant weeds.
Thanks, Dr. Young.
Dan, I might want to get you involved here. Talk to us a little bit about this last year. You had a chance to run the system on your farm for the season. Maybe talk about that and any strategy or changes that you made to the operation. Also, maybe on the upfront, talk about the conversation you had with your agronomist and what their reaction was to you wanting to move forward with See and Spray.
Sure thing. So we purchased the See and Spray Premium, and we put it on a model year 18 sprayer. Mm-hmm. And when I first decided to get the system, the biggest challenge I found is I didn't know how to use it. I knew it would work, but I didn't know how to change my herbicide program to make it worthwhile. Mm-hmm. And so I talked a lot with our agronomists and our crop scout and our chemical specialists, and there was a lot of pushback. Mm-hmm. And everyone was really afraid of not getting that layered residual, especially in soybeans. And so we came up with an idea, and we went forward with that, and that program seemed to work really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that, aren't we?
Yep.
Excellent.
So to explain our program, I'll kind of explain what we've done in the past. And so on the slide you'll see here this is what we've done in the past. We would do just a pre-emerge broadcast, and then we would come back with a single post-emerge broadcast. Mm-hmm. And in order to compare what we used to do with what we do now with See and Spray, I gave everything the same rate, the same chemicals, and the same cost. So for our pre-emerge, we used a Warrant Ultra, and then for our post-emerge, we used Warrant Ultra, Roundup, Clefidin, and Liberty. Mm-hmm. And so if you put all those together over our total bean acres, it came out to about $92,000 mm-hmm. of total chemical costs.
Now this year with See and Spray, you made some changes to that program.
Yep.
What'd you do?
We made some changes, and the biggest thing we wanted to do is we wanted to keep our layered residual.
Yeah.
So what we did is we stuck with the pre-emerge. That stayed the same. You know, we didn't change anything there. But then for our post-emerge, we couldn't figure out, since we didn't have the dual tank system, how do we do our residual and our contact together? Well, we basically took it apart. So we did a post-emerge of just residual. So we did a post-emerge of warrant, and then about a third of the acres we added Roundup, just because we had some grasses coming up, we had some ragweed starting to show up.
Yep.
And so I added Roundup to about a third of the acres for that tank, for that pass. And so if you look there, I did that over that many acres. And then, so I should explain the timing of that, is we did our pre-emerge, and then we did our post-emerge 3 weeks later.
Okay.
So we had our layered residuals, and after my first post-emerge, I came back with the See and Spray, and that See and Spray pass included Liberty, Roundup, Clefidin, and that was all that targeted broadcast application.
So you had that 3 week residual with your first pass, about 2 weeks of residual with your second.
2 week, yep.
And then you came back and got the rest of your weeds with See and Spray, and looking at what we have here, you saw about 66% savings on your beans this year?
Yep, yeah, the not sprayed, you know, we didn't spray 66% of the field, which is pretty significant savings. Now, the total cost of there for the applications together is at $75,000, and that doesn't include the subscription cost. You know, I had to add that in. But there was one other thing I had to add, is I added a third pass.
Third pass.
So that's not necessarily free. So I actually charged myself another $5 to help pay depreciation, fuel, hours on the machine. And so after you add that in, our total spray cost came out to about $84,000, which is still less than what we've done in the past. So if I would go to you and I'd say, like, hey, I can do a 3-pass system cheaper than a 2-pass system, I think a lot of people are going to go for that because of the timing window you have to control those weeds.
Yeah. Now let's look at both your soybean and your corn program, what we had. So what we see here is you used it on about 1,900 acres for beans. And that $7,000, that's kind of what we were looking at on the last screen.
Yep, yeah, that's basically came over from the last screen. And so yeah, this is our whole farm, you know, this is our savings for everything. So the bean acres, we saved about $7,000. And then on the corn side, I wasn't sure how to use it. To kind of go into that, I used multiple programs to figure out the best way to use it for corn. So our previous year, you know, our default spray program for corn would be is we would mix a pre-emerge with our nitrogen as a pre-plant.
Yeah.
And so we would put all our nitrogen down ahead of the planter, and that pre-emerge would go with it. And then I would come back with a single post-emerge pass. And that's been our, you know, our go-to for a long time. It works, so I haven't had a reason to change it. But with See and Spray, I had the flexibility to do things differently. So about half of our acres, we did that same program. I'd put my pre-emerge with the nitrogen, but then I would come back and I would See and Spray that post-application. So that was our first program we did. So another program we did is I would do a pre-emerge See and Spray target application. So I would use it on the fallow setting, you know, fallow ground setting. And I would do that, and then it would come back a second time with another post pass with a See and Spray application. And that worked really well. And my last program I did is I would do a full broadcast application over, you know, X amount of acres. And then I would come back about 3 weeks later and do a second post kind of See and Spray just to catch those weeds that I may have missed. And so if you add all of those programs together, that is our chemical savings, you know, including subscription and everything, machine pass cost, you know, all added together. It was pretty significant of $24,000, but I'll say that I'm not going to use that number moving forward. It felt as though I wasn't getting the control I should have been getting, especially on those latter two programs I just described. I didn't like the fact that I was repeating the same chemistry again and again. I mean, if you spray glyphosate on every acre every year, nothing good's going to come out of that.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of what Dr. Young was talking about, right? Maybe we can use better products in the future.
Yep. So moving forward, I'm gonna change my chemistry a little bit. So I mean, we had great savings this year, but I'm not really going to rely on that as much moving forward because I'm going to change those programs.
Yeah.
The conversation that you had with your agronomists and some of your other folks at the beginning of the year, maybe talk about perceptions now. Are they more engaged in having the strategy conversations or coming to you proactively of saying, okay, now that we've validated this on your farm, maybe let's consider XYZ changes for next year?
Yeah, and I haven't quite made up my program for this next year. We're still talking it over, but they're happy to see the control that See and Spray actually performed, and so they're confident in it now. And so now that we've got past that, we can move forward to our best chemical to use on those certain areas.
Yep. And I'll add, and for folks that are listening that are maybe going to have a See and Spray machine for the first time this year, or if you're an agronomist listening in that's going to have a farmer or a custom applicator that you work with running a machine for the first time, I think for me the biggest takeaway is you had a plan going into the year. You didn't wait for the machine to show up and say, okay, it's on my lot now, I got to go spray in 3 weeks. How are we going to use it, right? And so I would really encourage you, take the time now to have that conversation with your farmer or with your agronomist, and really talk about how you can best utilize this technology, the program changes, the product changes that you might make. So as you start your application passes, you have a really good foundation to work from as the year progresses.
Yeah.
If I could add, in terms of strategies for weed management using See and Spray, one challenge that I commonly hear about is the two-pass program where you use the soil residual herbicide, come back post-emergence, and you want to overlay another residual. I commonly hear debate about, well, when should you time that post-emergence application? Because some say that, well, if you wait for the weeds to come up, sometimes they get too big. And then now we're spraying weeds with a foliar herbicide, and the weeds are too large, and that's not good resistance management, and it might not control them. So we always try to encourage them, there's a calendar day type of approach. Like, okay, 3 weeks later, come back in with your post-emergence herbicide with the overlapping residual. But why some don't want to do that is, well, I don't have any weeds up yet. And so I'm going to waste my money on my foliar active herbicides. And I don't want to waste money across all my acres. But if you're using See and Spray, obviously you're not spraying across all your acres. You're just spraying on where you might have a few weeds there, but you can keep that calendar date mentality of keeping that getting that residual out there again. And that'd be common of something like a See and Spray Ultimate machine. Something you described 2 passes, you might be able to do a 2-pass system with See and Spray Ultimate.
Awesome. I'm going to share a little bit now. Thank you guys for walking us through your program and your experience. I'm going to walk us through some of the research results that we've seen working with partners. First off, I want to call out University of Arkansas, a paper that was recently published looking at different application methods with See and Spray. And I just want to quickly talk about 3 quotes that we pulled out of this study. Again, I would highly recommend that anyone goes and looks this paper up. The first one is, targeted applications provided comparable control to a broadcast application with less than 1% decrease in efficacy compared to broadcast. So again, we're doing as good of a job as a broadcast application with a targeted application like See and Spray. Next, the overall control for all of these weeds was over 93% for Palmer amaranth, broadleaf signal grass, morning glory species, and purslane. And this is important, I think, because not only is See and Spray giving us the same control as a broadcast, it's also doing that across a big variety of weed species. So the cameras are seeing and spraying a wide variety of weeds that look very different in the field. And the last thing I want to call out is their average savings was 28 to 62% across a range of residual herbicide products and timings of our post applications. This is a good thing to reference. Next, I want to call out Beck's Practical Farm Research in a study we did with them this year using a See and Spray premium machine. They had product savings that ranged from 47 to 52%, and they were doing comparisons of a 1-pass See and Spray post system to 2-pass See and Spray post system to a broadcast application. And one of the interesting results we saw was that soybean yield increased about from 3.3 to 4.2 bushels when they used See and Spray. And like Dr. Young said earlier, we don't expect that our herbicides will be decreasing our yield under normal conditions. but this was an interesting result that we saw this year from Beck's, and something that we'll be looking at with them in the future, again, to continue to evaluate how our different environmental conditions and the herbicides that we're using and the timing of those applications may or may not be impacting our crop health. And the last thing I'd like to share is a quick tillage study from 2024. This was in West Central Ohio, looking at soybean fields, where we took a See and Spray Ultimate machine, where we were See and spraying our contact herbicides and broadcasting our residual herbicide at the same time. And we're going to look at product savings for our contact herbicides across 3 different tillage systems. What we see here is that across full tillage, vertical tillage, and no-till, we see a big difference in the amount of product savings we have for our contact herbicides at planting or in crop. And again, I think this relates back to our weed pressure, right? What was our weed pressure in our full tillage system at the beginning of the year versus our no-till system? And there's a big difference. Now, I'm not saying this is the conclusive data that if you do full tillage, you're only going to get 30% product savings with See and Spray, but it is interesting to note how these different management changes in an operation do have a big impact on weed incidence, product savings, and the weed management strategies that you need to consider to your farm. So be on the lookout for more years and more data about tillage and how that might impact weed management in the future. And lastly, I just want to call out, these are some of our key university partners we've been doing research with: Iowa State University, North Carolina State University, Penn State, Purdue University, University of Arkansas, University of Tennessee, University of Nebraska, and Virginia Tech University. There's a lot of people that we've been working with in this academic space to make sure that we're doing, again, quality applications. So be on the lookout for more data and information to be coming from a lot of these university partners in the near future.
Yeah.